is the Fish and Game Committee. He handles the fish and the other side handles the game. And then Jim Wildman, who is the current chair of the Fish and Game Committee, is also in the audience. And so with us today, we have two special guests, Cody Norton, who is from the Wildlife Division, bear, furbearer, and small game specialist of the DNR Wildlife Division, and Kristie Sitar, who is also a wildlife biologist at the DNR. Kristie has worked with us at Hiawatha Club on deer management over the past years. She's always been very gracious to come and share her knowledge and expertise with us. So they are both here today. They both have a presentation, so they will each do their presentations, and then we will open it up for questions and dialogue. So without further ado, I think Cody's going to go first. And welcome. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you guys inviting me out here. We've got, let's see, like 4 different species we're going to try to touch on, and we want to make sure that there's time for questions and answers too. So try to kind of keep things brief, but hopefully give you some good information that stimulates questions at the end or throughout the presentations too. But yeah, and so currently I'm the bear, furbearer, and small game specialist. For the last just over 4 years, I've been leading the wolf and cougar program too. So today I'm going to kind of talk on bears and cougars, and then Kristie will actually take on deer and wolves as well.
And also there's coffee if you want some over there. Hot coffee on a hot day. There we go.
Perfect. So I'm sure all of you or most of you know we have a lot more bears in the Upper Peninsula than the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. We actually have about 80% of the bear population up here in the UP. Bear density, kind of an average across the UP, is about 1 bear for every 2 square miles. Compare that to the northern lower, it's about 1 bear for every 8 square miles. And the northeastern part of the northern lower kind of actually serves as a source population down there, where it goes kind of from higher density down to lower density until you kind of peter out in the southern lower. But since we're in the UP, we'll be talking about the UP today. All right, so these are our latest bear population estimates from 1992 all the way up till 2021, which is our latest estimate. We should have a 2022 estimate and then later this year, but it's always kind of retroactively because it relies on some of our harvest data that we get from bears that are harvested from hunters and information that we collect from hunters as well. But so in 2021, we had an estimated about 10,650 bears. That's up about 25% since 2012. And for those of you that might have been paying attention to bear populations then or bear hunting at that time, there was actually concern. You can see kind of a decreasing trend in bear abundance leading up to 2012 in both peninsulas. And so at that time, we actually reduced license quotas by about 30% across the state. There were actually some subsequent decreases in like portions of the northern lower and other units, with the intention of being able to cause that population to stabilize and increase. And you can see that it appears that that is working both in the UP and maybe a little too much in the northern lower as well. So for last year's bear season, we harvested just over 1,900 bears across the state. That was up 2% from the year before and about 12% above our 10-year average. And we did see some really good, I guess, hunter success rates in several of our Upper Peninsula bear management units and northern lower. The Newberry unit, which we'll kind of touch on more specifically here, was not an exception to that either. We had kind of above average success the last couple years in Newberry. So, and when I say bear management unit, basically all of bear range throughout Michigan is broken up into different bear management units or BMUs. The intent of that is to try to spread out both hunters so that we aren't competing, hunters aren't competing with each other or conflicting each other, and to distribute bear harvest across bear range, so that we aren't harvesting too many bears in some locations and not enough bears in other locations. And it also allows us, we get different indicators based on that harvest, where we can try to, keep track of bears on a more localized scale rather than just a peninsula or statewide. So with obviously where we're sitting right now, we're kind of right in the middle of that Newberry Bear Management Unit that covers most of the eastern UP. So this is actually harvest over time, all the way back since 1990 through last bear hunting season. And you can see, leading up to that 2012 license quota reduction, you can see where licenses were increased, or harvest was increased over time. And that was the case in many of our different bear management units across the state. Once we got closer to 2012, you can see those license quota reductions go in place. In recent years, basically we set the desired harvest for how many bears we want to take each year in each unit. And for the Newberry unit, that's been about 260 bears for the past several years. And you can see in 2018, 19, 20, we were pretty close to that, if not a little below. But then in those last 2 years, 2021 and 22, we've exceeded that desired harvest. So any of you that are bear hunters or have been paying attention to any changes in license quotas, those license quotas for Newberry have declined a little bit going into this year and next year. And the reason behind that is because we don't want to just consistently keep harvesting above our desired harvest, right? We don't want to consistently take more bears than we're planning to take. So we're going to adjust the license quotas down slightly so that our desired harvest is closer to where we want it to be. And we can dive more into that if any of you are interested how license quotas are calculated. And then, so I mentioned some of those other indicators and some of the other information that we get from bear hunters. So if any of you are bear hunters or harvest other species in the state through hunting or trapping, you've likely gotten mail surveys that go out to you after a hunting season or trapping season has closed. And so for bears, some of the information that we're able to collect from hunters on that is basically the amount of effort that they had to put into harvesting a bear, as well as how many hunters were actually successful out of the number of hunters that went into the field. And those are really good indicators, especially at that bear management unit level, rather than just our population estimates are only at the entire peninsula level. So to be able to have that localized look, we use some of these trend indicators. So down here, this is the amount of effort required per harvested bear, which is basically the number of days that hunters spent hunting per bear that was actually harvested. And you can see since 2012, and even before that in the Newberry unit, we've got a pretty strong decreasing trend, which would suggest that we've got an increasing bear population, right? If there's more bears out there, you're probably going to have to spend less effort in order to harvest a bear. Similarly, for hunter success rate, we've seen an increasing trend, especially since 2012, and maybe a lesser trend before that that shows increasing. So the more bears out there, given everything else the same, you're generally going to have more of those hunters be successful at harvesting a bear. And then, so kind of looking at these different bear management units, and one question that we get somewhat often, especially for the Newberry unit, is why is it so large, or should it be broken up? I don't know if any of you have ever heard that or thought that. But like I said, bear management units, with those, how they were established back in 1990 and some even before, were to distribute bear harvest and hunters across the landscape. So if we look at, especially the Newberry unit, we've actually got pretty well distributed harvest, even though that is one of the larger BMUs, or the largest BMU in the Upper Peninsula. And we actually have better harvest distribution than we do in some of our smaller units. You can see this very intensive cluster over in the Bergland and Berga BMU lines, where they kind of meet, and that's where kind of a heavy harvest happens, and some of the higher, bear harvest per square mile occurs in the state. And when it comes to bear hunting, demand is far exceeds the amount of interest or opportunity that folks would like to have. So every year, especially in recent years, we've seen this jump a bit as well. Right now, we're over 60,000 people applying every year, either for a bear license or a preference point holder. Each year, we're also only able to make available about 7,000 licenses, and that results in the harvest of about 1,900 bears each year, and that varies a little bit. But because of that discrepancy between the amount of demand for being able to bear hunt and the amount of opportunity our population can actually sustain right now, given our current regulations and season structure and everything else, we have a preference point system in place that basically functions, if you aren't familiar, with each year that an applicant is unsuccessful, they're awarded a preference point. Then each year when we hold the drawing, the licenses go to those applicants with the most preference on down until we run out of licenses. And that would apply to each bear management unit and then each hunt period within the bear management unit. And then there is a percentage of basically our desired harvest, how many bears we want to harvest, is allocated to the tribes that are part of the 1836 consent decree for those bear management units that overlap that territory. So it's some of them mostly in East UP and Northern Lower Peninsula. But that varies from 10 to 12.5% of the desired harvest goes to the tribes to allocate to or distribute to their members. And then I wanted to mention too, I don't know if any of you are bear houndsmen or know anybody or hunt other species with dogs, but we do record, investigate any dog depredations, so whether a dog is injured or killed by wolves throughout the UP. Any of them, I guess we would encourage, if any of you do have hunting dogs, even bird dogs, if you were to have an issue, to report that to our Report All Poaching hotline. So that's a hotline that's manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So if we do get a report, somebody actually receives that call and then can call around and find somebody that is working and that can respond as soon as possible, rather than it sitting on somebody's answering machine while they're on vacation or something like that. But we have a dashboard on our website where folks can actually go and see where verified dog depredations have occurred. Hopefully this is an important tool for hunters trying to avoid the dog conflicts if they're out, going to be going out into an area hunting. And then it also gives us obviously important information for considering different management options when wolves are under state management as well. But Kristie will touch more on wolves later. All right, and then you can jump into cougars. All right. So I think because we have a little bit more time too. One thing that I find fascinating about cougars is at the time of European colonization, they were the most widely distributed land mammal in the Western Hemisphere. So they're in North America, Central America, South America. But once European colonization happened, cougars were extirpated from the Eastern North America, Eastern US, by about the late 1800s. The last legally harvested cougar in Michigan was actually taken in Newberry or near Newberry in 1906. The last harvested or killed Eastern cougar. So there's actually those cougars that were found in the Eastern US at the time of European colonization were a unique subspecies called the Eastern cougar. Those that are still around in the Western US are the Western subspecies, and the Florida panthers are their own. But the last taken known Eastern cougar was taken in 1938 in Maine. And so that, I guess, comes into play. Obviously, it's interesting knowing where the last one was taken here. But in 2018, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually determined that it took almost 100 years, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the Eastern cougar subspecies was declared extinct. It did not exist anymore. And so how that comes into play nowadays is there are currently any cougar that were to show up in Michigan or the eastern US anywhere, they are not federally protected. They are those western cougar subspecies. They have obviously abundant populations in the western US and western Canada. So the only thing that protects them here would be state protection. So they are listed as a state endangered species. But that's very different than when we talk about wolves and the federal endangered species list and how that influences me. So just kind of maybe an interesting piece to the management puzzle there. Sorry, and actually you can go back one. Just got long-winded. So from that last cougar being legally harvested in 1906 in Newberry until the late 1990s and even early 2000s, there wasn't a whole lot going on in Michigan related to cougars. Once we got into the late 90s, early 2000s, there was maybe a couple sightings that showed up that appeared to have some characteristics, maybe tracks that had characteristics that appeared to be, yeah, this might potentially be a cougar, or we need to figure out how to evaluate these appropriately so that we can have a consistent approach, that we can have staff that are trained in identifying cougars and their signs. So by 2008, the Wildlife Division created a cougar team. And so basically they established exactly that, a protocol for investigating these, how to keep track of them, how to train staff so that they can accurately, consistently identify cougars and their sign. Now we have that in place. We also have an online reporting system. So anyone from the public can submit reports on our website and actually upload photo files, video files, audio files. We get all sorts of things. Listen to this. I think it's a cougar screaming at night. A variety of different things, but basically any of those that come through that reporting website or that get to us some other way, if they have any sort of evidence that appears consistent with cougars, then we can go out and do a field investigation, make sure, yes, everything does look consistent, it is a cougar, and it took place in Michigan. It's not a photo submitted from Texas or somewhere else. Like many of you may have seen on social media or other places that they pop up. So these are our confirmed sightings over time from 2008 when the cougar team was formed all the way through this year. And so far this year, we've had 4 confirmed sightings. It's important to keep in mind, we've had 97 confirmed sightings since 2008. That doesn't mean 97 different cougars, right? That means we've documented a cougar at this location 97, or at an individual location 97 times over this time period. And certainly one individual can get captured multiple times. I think it's also important to keep in mind, obviously we see an increase in tracking. So that could represent that we're seeing, more instances of cougars showing up in Michigan. Push next. But when the cougar team was first formed in the 2010s, most of these sightings were going to be actual tracks seen in the woods that maybe they call into the department. We instruct them to put a 5-gallon bucket upside down over it to protect it from rain or wind or snow coming down, and try to get somebody out there to see it and investigate it in person as soon as possible, right? But next, along the way, we've gotten cell phone technology progressing, right? To where most people, maybe not everyone in here, is going to have a cell phone in their pocket with a very good digital camera on it that they can pull out and take a picture of a track or an animal or anything else at any time. And then we've also seen trail cameras come a long way, right? So from where you had 24 photos that you had to go take in and get developed, all the way to, we've got cell cams now that will send you a picture in real time while that camera's still sitting out in the woods. So certainly, we've seen a shift in the types of reports coming in that we're able to investigate and verify, going from a physical track in the woods we have to go out there and look at, to photos and people picking up things on trail cameras that they never would have known were out there. So is it more cougar sightings, or are we getting better at documenting them when they're here, or both? Hard to say. And so we hear a lot of questions surrounding or speculation that we have a cougar population in Michigan. And so what we look at, obviously, we need evidence to be able to come to a conclusion like that. Currently, we have no evidence of a female being in Michigan. We have no evidence of kittens or reproduction being in Michigan. So that doesn't mean that that couldn't change tomorrow, but at this point, we don't have any evidence. So we do not feel that there's a breeding population or that we have evidence to support that there's a breeding population. And so what do we have? So here's an example. This was a male cougar from South Dakota, kind of the Black Hills area, which is on the border of South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming. That's one of the easternmost populations of cougars, so one of the closest populations to us. And this is an individual we assume right around generally male cougars, younger male cougars, right around 1.5 years of age, are going to take off from where they were born, their mom's home range. They don't want to have to compete with dad, who's bigger together and can outcompete them for mates and territory. So they're going to take off. They're going to look for a home range that might be vacant or with another young male that they can compete with or fight off. And sometimes they never find that, right? So this individual, as an example, went from that Black Hills population, went through Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We assume went through the Sioux into Canada, eventually down into Connecticut and got hit by a car after traveling at least 1,800 miles. So this is kind of one of those examples of this is what we would call a dispersing individual, a dispersing male cougar. And all of this was able to be pieced together from kind of scat samples, hair or blood, anything that we could get genetics off of. And so after this animal ended up getting hit by a car and they had the carcass in hand, they could tie it back to kind of trace where this animal actually came from, right? And so if we look at a couple other examples, we've had 2 cougars poached here in the UP. Both of these were males, so we actually got a carcass in hand. Both of them are males. We did genetic analysis on them, and the genetics were most likely from that South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming population. So one of those easternmost established populations of cougars. And so if you click probably 3 times, this would be that Black Hills population, Nebraska, verified, right? At least 3 different instances where individuals, young males or males, dispersed from there and ended up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There's also a population in Western North Dakota that's established that we could potentially get individuals from. And then of course, anywhere that there is an established population, if they can go 1,800 miles and end up in Connecticut, potentially we could have individuals come from other spots as well. If you click next. And so if we look at data that's been collected from state agencies across North America, so state and provincial agencies, you can see that the UP or Michigan is not unique in this, right? So anywhere that is east of those established Western populations has cougar sightings. The closer you get to those Western populations, the more of those sightings, the higher concentration of those sightings that you see. So in reality, if you had if you had a population like here in the Black Hills, you've probably got individuals heading in all directions, right? Some might go north, south, west, and then some number go east, and some of them find their way here into yeah, so that's what I had. Hopefully at least get the conversation started, and I'll let Kristie go. Want to do any questions initially? Yeah, okay. Sure. Yeah.
Any cougar that's planted in here doesn't live here. It's just passing.
So that's what we've never seen females, reproduction, kittens. Certainly an individual could. I think about the UP as almost like a funnel, right? It's probably pretty hard for them to get out of the east end. And in trying to track sightings when they pop up, it sure seems like some get in and head back west, back into Wisconsin or south. Obviously, we assume based on the kind of trail of breadcrumbs that one that ended up in Connecticut went through the Sioux. So some of them might hang out for a while, some might go back west, some might go east. That's our.
There's never a single female simply because they don't have to. That what it amounts to?
So females typically will disperse less often and less distance. So it's certainly not impossible for a female to show up here. We did, I think in January, or really early this year, a female showed up in Iowa and was legally harvested by a hunter because they aren't federally protected and Iowa didn't have any state protections in place for them. So that was a female that made it a long way from those Western populations. So it is, like I said, it's certainly possible. Just as of yet, we have not been able to document or haven't documented an actual female in the Union.
Yeah, just a brief question about bear population. Here at our club, the 36,000 acres. We're limited in permits in that most of the members don't live here, so they're not able to hunt here for bears. So we probably take, Doug could say, but I'm aware of 2 to 4 bears a year, something in that range. The last bear hunt that I did, I know I saw four different sets of cubs, twin cubs. The bears, they dispersed. We're taking less than we produce.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and bears are pretty similar to cougars. Young, like female cubs often will take over a portion of their mom's home range, where males are more likely to take off and disperse out into new areas, and that's quite a bit different than what we see with like wolves, where, young of both sexes often disperse or have similar rates of dispersal. So it kind of depends on the species there too, but yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to see. I guess if you did have a higher density in an area, you're generally going to see higher rates of dispersal too, because those home ranges are already occupied or, extra occupied. And they might have to travel farther and go off the ownership. But yeah, I know. So the northeastern part of the northern lower that we talked about, that's what they call club country down there, right? There's a lot of really big ownerships. They're managed very differently than the surrounding area. And those studies that have been done down there where they've actually tagged bears or collared bears in that club country, they see those bears show up throughout huge range of the northern lower. And it's because those animals are dispersing maybe even farther than you might see in other areas to get away from those high density areas that are already claimed. So you could certainly have that happening here on probably a smaller scale because you don't have just a huge area covered by multiple clubs. Yeah.
Cody, is there such a thing as suitable habitat for bear, like you have for other species, that would create an arena to attract them, or bears just roam around until they decide they like to stay in a place?
Sure. No, I think there's absolutely suitable habitat, or maybe more suitable and less suitable habitat. Where generally you're going to see even the northern lower, we actually harvest fewer bears per square mile down there, but we still have a lower density of bears too, right? So you've got more human disturbance, more agriculture mixed in, and then you get into the southern lower, there are no bears, or there's a random disperser, kind of like what we see with cougars up here. That's what they see in the southern lower of Michigan with bears, right? Where that habitat is not something that, at least as of yet, they've become established in. That's probably lacking forest cover. Bears are considered a forest obligate species. They need forests, they need trees in order to do well and set up home ranges and populations.
I think the trend, though, that we have downstate in the northern lower, there's a vast increase in population in certain areas.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the northern lower, we've got big areas with forested habitat, and they've got so many different types of hard mass species and, you know, food plots and actively managed areas that it's very suitable habitat. But then I think you run up against areas that are developed and not as suitable, like Traverse City and Cadillac and some of these areas that have a lot higher human density, right, than the UP. And so that's where you end up with a lower overall density, even though you might have really suitable habitat impacted. Does that make sense?
In the UP, do we have a problem with bear having to be relocated or becoming a chronic problem as they do in some areas downstate, or is that not a big issue up here?
I'd say it's nothing compared to the northern lower, but it's also spread over a larger area and depends on the town, right? We don't have as big a cities as a lot of there, like Grand Rapids. But I was gonna include a slide. I had a slide and I deleted it for time. But I think 2 years ago, the Baldwin Bear Management Unit, which is the northwestern northern lower, which includes Traverse City and Cadillac, that unit had more nuisance complaints than the entire UP combined. So just to kind of put that into perspective, but that's largely due to human density and conflicts, right? And also you have people retiring, moving up there that are coming from the southern lower or other areas outside of Bear Range, coming into Bear Range and having to try to figure out how to live with bears and not attract them. And then also bears moving into new areas as that density has increased. Bear distribution of where they're located in the northern lower has increased as well. So when those license quota reductions went in place in 2012, in the northern lower, we've seen that population increase about 69% in that same time period compared to up here about 25%. So that population has exploded in areas downstate. Yeah.
Can you address any difficulties that you have getting funded at the state level through the legislature to do your jobs? What are your biggest challenges in your particular field in doing what you're doing to get the money you need to get the job done?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not something that I'm involved with all the time. We certainly apply for grants and different things and try to inform some of those discussions when asked. I would say the bigger overall concern for most state wildlife agencies right now is that hunter numbers are declining, and nationally, I think about 2% a year, if I'm remembering right. And that's where the vast majority of funding comes from for state wildlife agencies, either from the sale of licenses or through the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is an excise tax on all firearms and ammo and other equipment used for hunting. So that's where a lot of state agencies are trying to figure out how do we kind of change that funding paradigm. If hunter numbers continue to decline, there's less funding coming in, but more people, more conflicts, more everything. How do we make up for that lack of or decrease funding? And I think there's a lot of different ideas out there trying to tap into the non-consumptive users, so bird watchers, hikers, people that are using state lands that we might be managing areas for, but don't have the pay to play model, right? Like hunting or consumptive users do. So there's things I think in the works or that folks are looking at, but there isn't a silver bullet right now. Good question.
The cougar that was cited here last year, do you have any information on that?
Yeah, I investigated it. No information as far as, other than that day. We spent a lot of time walking around. Boy, I don't even remember what part of the club we were on. But nothing in particular. we didn't have any, there weren't hairs or any blood samples or anything like that where we could have tested to determine what sex it was or just trash to identify.
We've tried doing a couple of genetic samples in the last handful of years. One of them was ended up being dog scat, but it was at a camera location where we had a cougar sighting, so we tried it, but it hasn't, we haven't had anything recently that we've been able to get genetic information on. We did have a cougar in Schoolcraft County that was maybe 3 years ago, I think, that we were able to get a full view in the trail camera screen and could tell that it was a male. We had another one, I think in Dickinson County, that was slightly less clear, but we were still about 99% sure and ran it past community biologists like out west that work with cougars or mountain lions a lot. Just to kind of get another set of eyes and make sure that we're calling things correctly. But those were two recently where we felt pretty confident in what the sex of those animals were. But otherwise, a lot of them, it's a photo or a track, and we just, you can't tell what they are for sure.
There were some videos from Garnet, maybe, I'm guessing 8 to 10 years ago, where folks were deer hunting and noticed that something dragged deer into the brush. And went in and looked, and a cougar had killed deer and was eating on it. They didn't see the cougar in that moment, but they set up a trail camera and got videos. And that was in the it would walk by the camera, and there's a little dark patch on the scrotus. That was male or male, just stick the tail is out of the way. So we've had some evidence, certainly, and like Cody said, most of the time, somebody's catching them on the trail camera. It's not the correct people.
I have two questions. The cougar is traveling that far, they must travel at night? Or is it hard to say?
I mean, that's when I'd say that's probably peak activity time. It probably depends on the time of year too. Like you see, in the springtime, you're driving around, there's deer everywhere, and then it gets towards fall and they shut down. Similar with bears, they get a lot more nocturnal when you get into hunting season, there's more people in the woods, more pressure. But certainly we've had daytime trail camera photos of cougars even here as well. But I'd say the majority of them are typically at night, and that's what we would expect, most activity to be occurring during.
The second question is this a black bear we're talking about here?
Yes.
Black bear, okay.
Yep, black bear, yep.
Is this bear different than the ones around the Smoky Mountain areas? I used to spend a lot of time in the Smoky Mountain area. Used to see bear all the time, but I've never seen one up here. I mean, I've seen pictures, but
Yeah.
is that different than one up here?
It'd be the same species, so it's still black bear. I mean, sometimes you get slight regional tendencies, differences in weight based on how long they den in the winter. Most species, this might be more than you want to know, but most species, they're smaller closer to the equator and get larger the farther north or south you go from the equator. It's called Bergman's rule. So if you think about Florida, like key deer are tiny in the Florida Keys, and then you go up into Saskatchewan and you can have 300+ pound whitetail deer. Same species, but very different size. Black bears are one of the few species that are opposite of that. So you can actually have larger bears down in Georgia or Florida, because especially males might lay down and take a nap for 3 days in the winter, and that's their whole hibernation. Females that give birth are going to den up for longer because they have cubs, but otherwise they're essentially feeding almost year round. Whereas up here they might be in a den for 6 months, and if you go farther north, it might be even longer. So that's you might see some differences like that, but still your typical bear that you're going to see out in the woods, it's going to be 130 pounds, and it'd be similar between the Smokies in here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You had mentioned preference points for a bear.
Yeah.
Can you apply for a preference point without applying for a license?
Yes. Yep. And that went into, so the whole application structure, BMUs, everything that we kind of currently have now was set up in 1990. The being able to apply for a preference point only came in a little bit later on, due to desire to be able to do that, right? So that you can stockpile preference points and not have to be applying for Drummond Island or something that you could hopefully try to accumulate for. But yeah, no, good question. And that's different than, you can apply for just a chance for elk, but that's something that confuses people a lot is the drawing system is different between the two species. For bears, licenses go to the highest preference points on down until you run out. So if you apply for a unit that typically requires 8 points to get, if you have 0 points, you essentially have no chance of getting a tag. For elk, it's your name's in the hat one more time each year that you apply. But in theory, you could still draw one the first year that you apply. So that's some sort of chance. And there's no guarantee that when you get a whole bunch of chances accumulated for elk that you're ever going to draw necessarily. It's just increasing your odds. Yeah.
How often do you encounter hunters that aren't licensed, and what happens?
Yeah, and I'm not law enforcement, so I think they would be the best people to ask for that. Usually bear hunting is pretty visible, especially to our conservation officers. So if you're baiting for bear, so most 98% or 97% of people that are bear hunting each year report through our bear hunter mail survey using either bait, dogs, or a combination of both to pursue bears. So if you're running bait sites, sometimes you're running that bait, might be every other day, might be a couple times a week, might be once a week, depending on how close season's getting. But most people are beating down somewhat of a trail. It's visible. They're driving around in a truck that might have buckets or, stuff like that. So usually our COs key into that and can figure out, what's going on in an area. If you're running dogs, it's even more visible, right? You've got a dog box in the back, you got everything else. Usually, I'm sure, people get creative and try to get around. And then if you were on private property, obviously, if you're hunting out your back door, that might be a lot harder for a conservation officer to find. But one thing that we have in place for bears in the state is in order to, basically every bear that's harvested has to be registered. And at the time of registration, it's given a seal. And so if you have a bear that's killed in Michigan and you try to take it to a taxidermist or ship it off to a tannery or do something else with the hide, or take it to a butcher shop to have processed, if it doesn't have that seal, it's illegal for them to possess it as well. So that, unless you're gonna do everything yourself in your house without taking it anywhere else, it would be very hard. And that's where kind of those red flags should start going off and a CO should get a call. Yeah.
Do you stand a better chance of drawing a tag if you apply for one of the later seasons?
Yes, in general, yes. So in the Upper Peninsula, excluding Drummond Island, those are the 6 mainland units are the only ones that have multiple hunt periods. So the northern lower is just 1 hunt period, Drummond Island is just 1. For the 6 mainland ones, they have 3 hunt periods. Generally, the first one is the most desirable, especially for bait hunters, and those typically always take more preference points to draw. The second season starts 5 days later, but dog hunters can start at the same time as somebody that would be baiting at that time. So the first season you have 5 days basically without dogs in the woods. So that's why that kind of becomes for bait hunters the premier that they're trying to save up preference points for. And then the third season starts. It used to be always, I think, 10 days after the second season. Now it varies a little bit. It's always October 25th. With it getting that late, you're starting to get close to when bears are going to start denning up. Sometimes in certain years, especially, pregnant sows and things might already be in the den when you're getting ready to start your hunt. So generally hunter success rates, decrease as you go from first to second and then drops off quite a bit in third. I think we've got some units that first seasons in the, 45% success range for hunters getting a bear. Second season, you might be 15 to 20% success, and by third season, you're usually like 8 to 10%. So 1 in 10 or less hunters are actually going to harvest a bear that have that tag in their pocket. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
I've got some notes with me because I have a field job and it's crazy busy time of year and I've been doing a million things at once. I'm hoping I can slow my training down, and not focus on one thing for 45 hot seconds maybe. But so I am a wildlife biologist for the DNR. I've been with the state for 25 years. I've been with Wildlife Division for 21 years, and 20 of those have been in the UP. When Cody was talking about some of the data that we look at for bears, success rates and effort, how much effort it takes for people to harvest bears, those are the pieces of data that I'm involved in looking at as a biologist, and hopes that quotas for different species, so we do that for bears, other species as well. I deal with nuisance complaints and wildlife surveys, and I also do a lot of work with wolves. So I've been involved with the wolf census since I've been here. I trap and radio collar wolves, including on the club. You guys have probably seen some notes about that. I used to, I didn't fly the airplane, but I was in the airplane and located wolves before we had satellite collars. I've collared wolves with drugs. I've collared wolves without drugs. I've even collared a wolf that wasn't even in a track one time. So I have a lot of experience in that realm. And so I want to be able to give you guys some information today. I thought I would just, there's a million things you can talk about with wolves and deer, right? So I wanted to, with wolves, I wanted to stick with some of the misconceptions. I understand you guys are concerned with deer harvest of late on the club, and I imagine that there are some thoughts that wolves are responsible for that. So I want to look at numbers today and give a quick checkbook type analysis to kind of walk you guys through how to consider if our wolf estimates are even remotely close to what you might think or might hear folks about. So I'm going to talk about those types of topics with wolves, and then I'm going to talk about deer a little bit, and then mostly going to focus when I get to the deer talk, super short fancy version of a much larger talk that if you guys want at another time. Factors affecting deer might be related to the predator prey project that happened in that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. One of the first things is that everybody thinks that we brought wolves here. It's only a tiny bit here. One time, man, yeah, 1974, 4 wolves were brought in from Minnesota to the Upper Peninsula. The folks over here in this picture, one on the right is Tom Lisi. He used to be a East UP wildlife supervisor. He's retired now. The guy on the left is a professor at Northern Michigan University. This was Tom's graduate project. So 4 wolves were brought in. They were held in this pen to acclimate for about a month. They were released in the Huron Mountain Club north of Marquette. All 4 of them were dead in less than 8 months, hit by cars and poached, and there was no reproduction. The only time wolves were ever brought into Michigan. So how did we get wolves here? Well, they dispersed from neighboring states. So this next slide just gives you a little bit of a landscape view of what was going on with wolves in recent years, and if you count 1960 as recent. So in 1960, this is Minnesota over here. Northern Minnesota always had a stronghold of wolves in the 60s. And then as the Endangered Species Act came into play in the mid-60s, wolves began to expand a little more in a southerly direction in Minnesota. And then in the mid-70s, there was breeding on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. After that, wolves started coming into the Upper Peninsula in the 1980s. You guys probably can't see that white color back there. I'm thinking I can barely see it here. but from Wisconsin and from Ontario, wolves started coming into the Upper Peninsula. And the first breeding record in Michigan was in 1991. So long distance dispersals is how they got. This slide, the green box that you see over here in the West UP is the first location of the wolf that we radio collared a couple years ago, I believe. And these yellow circles with the lines connecting them show where this wolf went. And the red box is where this animal died. So they're making big movements, right? And we've had lots of instances of that. So they're leaving the state with big movements, they're coming into the state with big movements. We've had a wolf that came and set up shop in just outside of Newberry that came from Biologist County, Wisconsin, one of the northwestern counties in Wisconsin. We had a wolf that I radio collared kind of southwest of Gould City. That, where was I going with that one? Yeah, got harvested in Quebec. Okay, so it's really not uncommon. We had a wolf a couple winters ago that ended up just outside of Iowa, then just outside Minneapolis, then in North Dakota, then up into Western Ontario, and moved almost 2,000 miles before that wolf was shot. So they're big movers. So we really never brought wolves in other than that one time in 1974. The next myth I just want to talk about is that, people do not believe our numbers. When they see one wolf, it automatically is inflated to at least 2 or maybe far more than 2. And so I want to talk a little bit about, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our numbers and how we have done the survey in the past, the wolf survey, and then where we're going with that. So currently, we do a wolf survey every other year in Michigan, and in the Upper Peninsula, I should say. We used to do the entire UP every single year, and it's really costly. It costs a lot of staff time. It's a huge endeavor, and so I don't remember what year we went to the model. I always forget to look that up. Probably sometime, I think maybe in 2008 or so, we developed a model with Central Michigan University professors to subsample the UP when we do a wolf survey, and we do it every other year now. So there are 21 survey units in the UP, and they are randomly drawn. The ones in yellow would be the ones that are randomly drawn in a given year. They are weighted by wolf density. And so those units would be done in this particular survey year. And so when we go out and count wolves, you're driving and snowmobiling, and snowshoeing, and sometimes skiing to count all the wolf tracks that are there. We have to distinguish packs from each other. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But this model, when we came up with this model, what we did that first year was we did the entire UP wolf survey like we always did. And then we also were testing this model. So we knew how many wolves were in each one of those 21 surveys. And then we ran the model again and again and again and tweaked the model. And it got to the point that no matter which units were randomly selected, the model was giving us a really close estimate to our total. So that's what we've been using now ever since we, I think right around 2008 or so. So sometimes we use the airplane to just help us find a particular path that maybe isn't coming out to a road or a trail or any place that we're finding them. So sometimes we'll find them from the airplane, see them, and then go on the ground and count those animals to make sure we have that right. And again, I said we need to distinguish between different packs of wolves. We'll talk about that again in a minute, but this graph shows, you probably can't see these numbers. This is 1989 and 2020 on the far side. And these are the number of wolves. So we just started
wolves just started recolonizing the UP back in the early 90s. And this is the population trajectory since that time. When you get over here to where we're, yeah, it looks like maybe 2007 or so, where we started using that model, you can still see the data points. We're missing some, but that's because we only do it every other year now. And you'll see these error bars. So what this means is there's the model now does not tell us, you know, it's not us counting all the wolves anymore. It will give us an estimate, and it says, we are 99% or 95% sure that you are between this high number and the low number with your estimate in the middle. What is noticeable about this graph, and again, you might not be able to see it super well, but I have something coming up that in a table format. Since 2011, the wolf population has essentially remained stable between 600 and 700 animals. Oh, and somebody might catch that we're talking about a minimum winter population. Every wildlife estimate that exists is a minimum, right? Unless you're talking about, you know, animals in a cage or animals in an island that cannot escape, that are super huge like moose and you can't miss. So don't get concerned about the minimum aspect. That's just standard. So this is that same data from 2011 to 2022, where I said that the population has remained pretty stable. I just put it in a table format. So our population estimates range from a low of 618 plus or minus 50. That's what those error bars are. So plus or minus 50 to a high of 695 plus or minus 75 in 2020. So that's not a lot of variation across the entire UP. The number of packs is over in this column. The low is 124 packs in 2016 and 143 packs in 2020. And the last column over here is average pack size. And it's always, you know, a little above or a little below 5 wolves per pack. So we're going to use some of those pieces of data a little bit later, but that's a little bit easier to see sometimes than those error bars and to understand that. So I made this graph just to give you guys an idea. When we had, this is wolf abundance on the bottom axis here. So we're starting over here with no wolves, and this far right side is about 700 wolves. When we had, the line that you see here is a trajectory that fits all of these data points. So it doesn't go from point to point to point, but it's the general direction of this set of data. And what it shows is that when we had very few wolves in the UP, 100 wolves in the UP, our population growth rate was pretty high. If you follow 100 up, we had probably somewhere in the realm of 30% growth rate on the population. As you get out to here, where we have 600 or 700 wolves, and where you encounter this line, our growth rate is a lot lower. And now that we have essentially have a population that is pretty stable from 2011 to this point, we're essentially at 0 population growth. I'm not saying there is 0 population growth, but when population is that stable, there's, you know, we're essentially talking about no change, right? Okay, so how do we distinguish between packs? Well, the radio collars are super helpful. I didn't actually bring one with me today, but so we trap wolves and radio collar them in these areas where we know we're going to have to survey the next time. So those yellow units that have already been randomly chosen for the next time we survey, we know where those are, and we're ready to try to catch wolves in those packs, those particular packs in those areas that will help us make distinctions. And our collars, our radio collars are satellite collars now. So we don't have to fly in the plane and locate those wolves every time we want data anymore. It arrives right on the computer. We actually get a text message if a wolf dies. So it's pretty handy. In this upper picture, can you go back there for a second? This upper picture, this wolf is in a trap right here, and this is one of my coworkers using a jab stick to inject it. And then that gives you a little bit of a look of the radio collar right there. Okay. I just put this up here for a sec because some folks haven't seen wolves before. This is the typical color of a wolf. They have this dark saddle, usually on their back and their shoulders. Their hair is banded, so you can see different colors of hair along that, especially in the big ruff where the hair is really thick on top of the shoulders. This wolf, you can also see that saddle, if you will, on the shoulders and the back is a little bit lighter in color. So one more. There are wolves that appear black. They're not black like your black lab. It's more like a salt and pepper. But from a distance, they look a little black, and some of them are really light colored. The legs on this one over here were just, everything on that wolf was very, very light. That animal actually was a little bit on the older side, but so there's a little bit of variation there. Wanted to show that for a hot second. Okay, so this is how these radio collars help us. The different colors on here are different collared animals, and this is data from several years ago, quite a few years ago at this point. Here's Gold City, here's Engadine, Newberry is right here, Deer Park, Whitefish Bay. So each different color is a different animal. This pack right here was really cool. This is the Zini pack, and they summer up here and they winter down here. And this line of movement is what happens when deer migration happens. They come and go. They also actually come back up here in winter and kind of check on their den location and go back to where they're going to spend the rest of the winter. But this helps you can get a little bit of a visual here. Oftentimes they're pretty disjunct, right? I mean, this purple collar, this green collar, they're really not crossing back and forth and interacting with each other very much. You sometimes have animals like this light blue animal that clearly never settled in, probably a loner, not necessarily part of any one of these packs. But there's not a lot of overlap. Sometimes there is. This red pack and this green pack down here do overlap a little bit. So this is why the radio colors are very helpful for us, because we can say, okay, this is called the Bullock Ranch pack. I'm not going to talk in that area because I don't need those areas, but it's harder for me to see this green pack. There are actually two different greens right here. This one right here is on the Hiawatha Club. Plate behind us is actually right under here. So it helps us really distinguish those packs. Okay, so now I'm going to get down into the meat of checking our numbers a little bit, but in order to do that, you need a little bit of biology background on wolves. So wolves are a top predator, and they feed primarily on ungulates. That's no surprise there. Ungulates are deer, hoofed mammals. So in Michigan, we only have, well, I'm going to back up. I'll hit this one. Males typically weigh about 85 pounds. Females typically about 75 pounds. There's a lot of variation there, but that's kind of an average. Wolves live in packs, and a pack is a mated pair and their offspring. If you live in a state where there are multiple ungulates that your predator, wolves in this case, feed on, then your pack size of wolves tends to be bigger. So we don't have elk in the Upper Peninsula, but this elk number down here, if you're in a state where there are elk and other ungulates, your pack size average might be 10.5. This is data from other states. If you're in a state where wolves eat deer and moose, your pack size average might be 6.5. Some states, their pack size average when deer are the only ungulate is about 5.7 hours. Here in Michigan, if you remember that data from 2011 on, the long-term average there is about 4.9. So that's what we are right now. Wolves breed about once a year, and usually it's only the alpha male and female that do the breeding. Adult survival of wolves is pretty decent, about 75%, and pup survival is very low. Pups are actually born at a time of year, or I should say they're growing right now in the summer, where it's the hardest time for wolves to catch prey. Prey can run away really quickly, and they're not as vulnerable, and a wolf pack has a lot more mouths to feed, so a lot of pups die from starvation. And then the average wolf territory is about 100 square miles. The median number is 82 square miles, and the reason those differences matter is we're used to talking about averages for things, so we know that the average is about 100 square miles. But go ahead, and I think it's the next slide. I just kind of stuck this one in here. Yeah, the reason we use a median is because averages are affected by really small numbers and really big numbers. So this is just a histogram. There are some wolves out there with really huge, like 400 square mile home ranges or territories, I should say. Those wolves with really large territories would affect that average tremendously. So in situations like that, the more representative number to use when you're talking about territory size is the median number. And that is 82 per mile. So we're going to use that in our calculation. Okay, go for it. So just some simple math here to see if our estimates are in the ballpark, right? Does the DNR know what they're talking about? So if we knew three things: how much of the UP do wolves reside in, how big are their territories, and how many wolves per pack or per territory are there, we could use this simple formula where the number of wolves, or the abundance, would be the occupied range divided by the territory times the pack size. So let's do that. So at two separate times, two different researchers looked at the available wolf range in the Upper Peninsula, or the occupied range in the Upper Peninsula. So this guy Potvin in 2005, he came up with about 64% of the UP was suitable range. And 2017, O'Neill said about 63% of the UP was occupied by wolves. So pretty similar, right? The hot spots on here, on this image that you have, the darker red, the more wolves there were. And this is from 2013. So this is going to shift a little bit. The unused parts of the UP tended to be urban areas. So this is the Marquette, Negaunee, Ishpeming area. They tended to be areas with a lot of agriculture, right in here in this range, or areas with really low deer population. So Whitefish Point and the Keweenaw Peninsula. Doesn't mean a wolf never walked in those areas. Doesn't mean a wolf doesn't exist there. Just means it was really low numbers of wolves that existed.
It looks like it would be high in the Hiawatha Club, if I'm reading that right. We're on top of the lake
You
there.
would be right about here. So this red spot over here is closer to Cut River.
Yeah, and then
And
that one.
this red spot is north of you guys.
Okay,
You're kind of right down here in this range that's, I don't know, I can't do those colors that well right here. It's somewhere in the, let's say 6 to 15. It's one of those orangey colors. Right in here.
Obviously, we sit between those two.
You are between those two, yep. Okay. So that tells us,
Are they killing the deer? I mean, is the deer population going down because of the wolves?
so
You said that's
a-
one of their.
well, I'm
right.
gonna get to that part
Okay,
for
got
sure,
it.
because I know that's what everybody wants to know, right? But I'm just getting started.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm gonna get there, so hang tight. Okay, so I just wanna, this is again, just to show you the difference between, that's not my phone, is it back there? Between territories and home ranges. These are wolf territories on this side. Again, you can see they're pretty disjunct, right? Their wolves defend a territory. They don't like to share with other canines. They sure don't like to share with other wolves. So these are separate collars in different packs, except for this pink and brown. This is two collars in the same pack. this chunk right here north of Sini. Deer, on the other hand, have home ranges. They're not territorial. They're not gonna go fighting another deer who decides to come and eat right next to them. And so their home ranges tend to overlap. Just the little thing to keep in mind. That's how we feel comfortable saying, if this pack has 5 animals, then it's not, this pack isn't coming in and counting in those 5 animals at the same time. This is how we distinguish packs, and that becomes important with this next piece that we're gonna do. Okay, so let's just do that math real quick. 65%, we say those guys had 63 and 64% of the UP was occupied. Let's just say 65. 65% of the UP is 10,725 square miles. We said that the median home range is 82 square miles. That's what this top line is. So we've got 10,725, which is the occupied range, divided by the territory size, which is 82, times 4.9, which is the pack size. It gives you 640 wolves. That's pretty darn close to what our estimates are. Certainly between 600 and 700 with your plus or minus, right? Let's say, okay, you know, that's horse hockey, 65%, bull crap. Let's go 75%. This line down here is 70, the same numbers plugged in, except 75% of the UP gives you 739 wolves. Still pretty darn close, right? If you say, I don't believe that either, I want to see more. So this bottom line is 85% of the UP. 85% of the UP is occupied by wolves. That calculation is 838 wolves. So people who are out there saying, oh, the DNR is a bunch of liars, I don't believe you're 600 or 700 wolves, it's 2,000 wolves. We're still on. We're nowhere near 2,000. If this is not how we calculate, this is just a little, let's just see if the numbers work out, right? And lo and behold, they do work out. Okay, so that's what I have for wolves for now. I'm sure there will be more wolf questions. I'll be happy to answer wolf questions, but let's move on to deer, because I think that's, you know, I think that's what some of the club members were interested in hearing about is, hey, our deer season really stunk. And I imagine there are some folks that think that that is all due to wolves, and I want to give you some data. I'm not.
Yeah, I know the hunters, but even those of us that drive the trails and stuff, we usually see a fair amount of deer. We didn't see any.
Yep, for sure. So go ahead and hit that. There is a much bigger presentation where I could go into every next slide in a lot more detail, but we weren't quite sure how much time you guys wanted to sit and listen to us today. So I'm giving you the brief version. And I'd be happy to come back sometime if you guys would like to hear that whole presentation. It is quite a bit longer, but we go into the data a lot more. So I'm going to cover things a little bit faster and skip a few little pieces, but try to still make it make sense anyway. Okay, so we're going to start with the fact that, so the green line that you see on top is the lower peninsula, the blue line is the UP. Okay, these are the number of deer harvested in the UP in the northern lower from 1985 to just about 2020. Okay, I think the last 9 says 2019, but there's data for 2020, I believe. So you can see that the number of deer harvested both in the UP and the northern lower has declined since 1985, right? You don't really have to tell people that. Everybody knows that there's fewer deer around than there were in 1985, even though this isn't the number of deer, this is the number of deer harvested. That's one piece. So the other thing that we noticed is that the number, and now this is just the UP now, okay? So that decline that you saw in the northern lower, keep in mind, no wolves in the northern lower, right? I mean, no wolves, there's probably like 1 or 2, but there are not wolf populations, big populations in the northern lower, right? So this is just UP data now. For everything else I'm talking about is just UP data. So the yellow line on here, with the circles, is the number of deer hunters in the UP from 2001 to 2020. We're gonna go back to 1985 because it turns out we weren't that good at paying attention and recording that kind of stuff way back then. So in the last 20 years, the number of deer hunters in the UP has dropped from 130,000 to about 80,000. Okay, and the blue line on here is the buck harvest. Buck harvest has also decreased as hunters have decreased, and that makes sense, right? If you have less hunters, you're probably gonna harvest less here. This is one of the things we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but I wanted to show you in case somebody points out. This is from 1990 to 2018. The number of regulation changes that, the type of regulation changes that happened and the corresponding, so the blue line again is buck harvest. In that same time, and you can see the regulation changes up here. We went from $2, any season, no restrictions, here are your buck tags, go do good things, to $2 requiring a combo tag. In this period right here, one was a restricted tag and one was 4 points, or one was 4 points on a side and one was not a restricted tag. 2 down here, both combo tags in UP were restricted. So this just gives you an idea that it's definitely not a simple thing, right? We've had declines in hunters. We've had declines in harvest. We've had changing harvest regulations that would impact what people can harvest. That's one
Well,
more.
on our property, but I don't know what other people have seen, but as we are hiking or driving back on the trails, I don't know, rarely ever have seen a buck, most are doe that we see, at least in our driving around.
Yep, definitely more does than bucks out there. Yep. Okay, next one. So from now on, I've talked a little bit about buck harvest, and I'm going to continue to talk about buck harvest as a surrogate or a measure of the deer population. And here's why, again, this is a super brief explanation, but here's why we feel okay doing that. In Crystal Falls, so this predator prey project that happened in the UP happened in a low snowfall zone, a medium snowfall zone, which is Crystal Falls, and a high snowfall zone. This, and sometimes little teeny tweaks of data happened in different zones. In the Crystal Falls zone, they definitely had cameras out to determine deer abundance. That's what these green bars are. So 2012 to 2019. So for those, says 7, but I think it's 8 years of data there. Or my brain says 7. Anyway, for those years, these green bars are what that research project determined deer abundance was. And you might think, well, who cares? That's Crystal Falls. That's not here. The point of this is that the blue line is buck harvest in the Crystal Falls area. And that blue line being buck harvest really tracks pretty well with what the deer population was doing, right? So that's why we're going to be talking about buck harvest as a surrogate or a reference for what the deer population is doing. Okay, next. I'm going to talk for a half of a hot second about habitat changes in the UP. Hemlock is probably the most valuable deer cover that there is. It's even better than cedar. We've lost 97% of hemlock in the Upper Peninsula since humans have started residing here in post-settlement days. We also have had a reduced amount of aspen being summer forage for deer. We've also had a greatly reduced amount of aspen being harvested from the highs in the late 80s and early 90s. Everybody says, man, there were so many deer in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, we were also cutting a boatload of aspen, not just we, state, UP-wide, a boatload of aspen was being cut. There was all kinds of food on the ground for deer, if you will. And the thing is, you can't do that every year because aspen takes 60 years before it's harvested again. So there's a habitat component to changes in deer over time as well. The super simple, super simplistic way to talk about that. So I want to talk about winter now because winter impacts are pretty huge on deer. You guys Being in this club, we understand. I don't know, maybe folks in this room aren't up here in the winter, I don't know, but you probably have an idea that winter is pretty real up here in UP. So I want to talk first about how deer survive in the winter. So there are, if during the summer and fall, deer are eating nutritious forage and they're putting on a lot of fat, right? They're spending time putting on a lot of fat and getting ready for winter. And when winter comes, they're able to reduce their metabolism and switch to woody browse. So they're saying, oh man, all the good stuff is gone. I'm going to eat this woody stuff. I can't get as much energy out of it, but it's better than nothing. I have these fat reserves. This is what I'm going to be living on. I'm going to slow my metabolism down, so I have to spend less energy, right? And that's what they do. When they spend less energy, they save more fat to get them through the winter. So they travel to deer yards from across the Upper Peninsula. Deer yards or deer winter complexes, they're the same thing. The benefit of deer yards is several benefits, but a couple are that if lots of deer are coming to this really good winter cover, then those lots of deer make lots of trails. And if you're a deer in the snow in the winter, having a trail to walk on that's already packed down is easier than moving through deep snow. If you can move on a trail, you're spending less energy than you are moving through deep snow. So deer yards are beneficial to them that way. These deer yards have a really good cover component. So they're conifers. Be great if they were all hemlock and cedar, but they're not. But other conifers are in that complex of the deer yard also, and they reduce snow load in the deer yard. They also make it just a tiny bit warmer if you have good cedar or hemlock cover. So being a tiny bit warmer and having a tiny bit less snow makes a difference in how much energy you have to spend to move around as well. So that's another way they're saving energy. When you run out of fat reserves and winter is still going on, you die, right? If you have nothing, no other body resources to live on, and you can't get access to food because it's winter and it's all under the lots of snow still, then you're going to die. And again, super simplified version here. But fawns die quicker than adults do because fawns go into winter with very little fat compared to adult deer, right? They're spending all this summer, they were born back in June, early June. They're growing a body, they're getting bigger. They're not putting on a lot of fat because they're growing. So fawns go into winter in very, I'm not gonna say very important. They go into winter with a lot less fat than adult deer. They have a larger surface area to body weight ratio, so they lose heat faster. So they go in with less fat, they lose heat faster just standing there because of their surface area to body weight ratio, so they die first. The problem there is that if all of your fawns die because they have no more fat reserves and winter is still going on, then you have no growth to your deer population the next year. Those fawns were what was going to grow your deer population. So that's an issue. And that predator-prey research found that the timing of when spring snowmelt happens is more than twice as important than how deep the snow was or how cold it was. So it's far more important when spring comes. If it comes earlier, that's far easier on the deer than if the snow is deep all along. So the idea here is that you can only live on this low metabolism situation, energy saving situation for a certain amount of time. You know, eventually you can't continue. You have no more fat reserves. So that's just a little piece of how they survive in the winter, and it leads into this next slide. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to take a minute to explain it. The blue lines, the blue shapes here with the peaks, those are the number of days with greater than 12 inches of snow on the ground in a particular winter. Data here goes from 1980 to 2020 on the far side, 40 years of data, okay? So if the blue is the number of days more than 12 inches or more than a foot of snow on the ground, that's when deer can't dig through the snow to get food, is when there's a foot or more.
What geographic area is that?
This is UP data.
Just the UP, okay, the whole UP.
This is
Okay.
just UP, yep. And actually, yeah, so these are UP wide estimates, okay? So the higher the peak on this blue part of the graph down here, the higher the peak is more days of more than a foot of snow on the ground that year. When you see numbers up above 95, 93, the last one over there is 122. Those numbers are the number of days. So in this winter, which again, I'm eyeballing this from the side, in 1982, 95 days of more than a foot of snow. 2020, 122 days of more than a foot of snow. 122 is bigger than 95. That's a worse winter, right? That's a winter severity in here. This dashed line across here is 90. Anything above 90 days of more than 90 days of more than a foot of snow is a severe winter. So everything that you see with a number above it is a severe winter. Okay, so that's what this graph looks like. Let's look back to the late 80s and early 90s. Everything before here. Okay, 2 severe winters, right? From 95 on, look how many severe winters. More than 5 times as many severe winters since 1995 than prior to 1995. More than 5 times. And in addition, you have 2 years with consecutive severe winters and 2 years with 3 consecutive severe winters, back-to-back severe winters. You didn't have any of that in the 90s. In the 90s, 67% of the winters were mild. You had very, very few mild winters from 95 on. See, I just want to make sure there wasn't something else there was. So remember how we said fawns die first in a bad winter, and that if your fawns, pretty much all of your fawns die, your deer population doesn't grow the next year? Oops, I need you to go back. Thank you. These are all, this is 2 years in a row with no added fawns to your population. 3 years, no added fawns. Another 3 years, no added fawns. And you're not getting many winters in between to make any mild or moderate winters in between to make that population grow. So this is UP-wide data. Oh, the other thing that is going on, of course, is you're having a severe winter. The does out there that go into winter with a little more fat, right? It's going to take them a little longer before they get to the position where they have no fat reserves left, but they're pregnant, right? So even if they don't abort those fawns, they're going to give birth to fawns and not have a nutritional high quality milk to keep those fawns alive. So there's that impact as well.
What is the life of a deer? How long do they live?
Oh, they can live to be more than 30 years old, for sure. That's not really what happens in the beach.
What happens to the
They just, you know, life is a lot harder in the UP than, you know, down here. And even in this area. There's just a lot more snow up here, so they don't. They have a harder life. Okay, next slide. So this is, I put this up here so you guys could get a little bit of this is a visual of winter severity, if you will. The dark green is a severe winter. This super light green is a mild winter. The in between is the moderate winter, right? So this lets you look at things on or more of a regional scale, right? In 2020, almost the whole UP was a severe winter. In 2021, almost the whole UP was a mild winter. These pieces over here had a moderate winter. So the thing, if you just want to look at the East UP 9 of the last 12 winters in the East UP have been severe winters. And the mild winters that you have are really far apart from each other. They're not back mild winters, which would let your fawns survive, which would let your population grow. 4 of the last 5 from 2018 on in the East UP have been severe winters. It's really hard to get your deer numbers to come back when that's what you're dealing with.
How does a severe winter correlate with the timing of spring?
So if a severe winter, remember, is more than 90 days of more than a foot of snow on the ground. And if that snow were to come, if the snow comes early, you know, there was a year, probably 5-6 years ago now. It certainly wasn't this winter. Maybe it was 2018 when we had that 4 feet of snow in like November 6th. When snow comes early, deer are in better shape. They've got all their fat reserves, right? But when we still have 2.5, 3 feet of snow on the ground at the end of April, that is just too much for deer. They don't have any reserves left. They've already spent those reserves all winter long. They've got nothing left and they still can't get food. So it's kind of related, but not necessarily. Okay, next slide. I know I've told you a few times, I'm simplifying things. This is mucho simplified right here, these next 2 slides, because there's a lot of data here. And again, I didn't know how long you guys were going to want to sit here and listen to this stuff. So in the super simplified version, the Predator Prey Project looked at all the things that eat deer other than humans. So all the predators, bears, coyotes, bobcats, and wolves. The most numerous predator are bears and coyotes. They're far, far more abundant than wolves and bobcats, right? We're talking about 700 wolves in the UP, what, maybe in the ballpark of 10,000 bears in the UP, right? We don't really have good bobcat numbers or coyote numbers, but I mean, UP wide, but the abundance estimates from the Predator Prey Project show bears and coyotes being vastly more abundant than wolves and bobcats. Wolves and bobcats are better at killing adult deer, but there just aren't that many of them.
I thought bears were more vegetation, not eating deer.
So they're omnivores, they'll eat all kinds of things, but the thing is that bears actively hunt fawns when fawns are born. And so even though bears and coyotes don't each kill lots and lots of fawns, the fact that there are so many more of them than wolves and bobcats, they're having larger impact by killing more fawns. Does that make sense? And wolf mortality on fawns is actually the lowest of all 4 predators. All those 4 predators. Okay, next slide. Again, super simple version. Wolves do kill more adult deer than the other predators. Okay, so they kill more adult deer, but when you look at the timing of when they're killing those adult deer, most or like more than half of the adult deer that they're killing during late winter. And when you look further at the data, at the femur fat analysis, so I gotta explain that. The last place that deer use fat from their body before they're zilch and they're out is the bone marrow fat in their bones, in their femur. When they start using that, they're done. Doesn't matter if you stuck them in front of a smorgasbord of food, they're not going to recover. So when you look at the femur fat analysis of those adult deer that wolves killed, more than half of those deer, those adult deer, were already done for. So that I think is actually you can go ahead and switch it to the last one. So I don't, you know, this isn't super easy to make this point as clear with a shortened presentation like this, but I hope that you guys got the feel that winter is a huge issue impacting deer survival. And if you don't buy that and you still want to hate wolves as having the biggest impact on deer, you maybe should switch your hatred to coyotes or sort of Cody bears. Because if you really want to dislike a predator that's impacting deer, wolves are really not your best bang for your buck.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate
Okay.
here for a second. You're arguing the factors of the bear and the coyotes being having more predation on fawns than wolves. But if I want to argue against wolves, I say, let's remove one factor. That being the wolves, and then you cut down the predation. And I'm playing devil's advocate because I am not anti-wolf.
Well, how about you cut down on coyotes and you reduce the predation a heck of a lot more? So
Yes, except that that's the argument you're using, bears and coyotes. And the wolf, for some reason, the wolf has the ire of a lot of people, whereas coyotes do not.
Well, I think because, we don't have bedtime fairy tales about a big bad coyote. We have bedtime fairy tales about a big bad wolf, right? And so I think that's why, right? And in being brief, the graph with the blue peaks and the yellow and the line where the numbers were above the line. I have that same graph showing deer harvest also. And I probably should have put that in here. I did this on Sunday really quickly, and I probably should have thought and put the other two slides that follow that one in here, because the next slide is that same graph and it shows deer harvest. And basically the take home here is that the year after a severe winter, buck harvest, which is, remember, a reflection of the deer population. After a severe winter, buck harvest drops, the population drops dramatically. After a mild winter, buck harvest increases because the population increases. The next slide is all of that and the wolf population. And so what you can see then is, and you can see it best in the, if you look at just the last 20 years, the last 11 of which we said wolves are pretty stable. So if you back it up and look at the last 20 years, you can see that all of those changes still happen even with wolves on the landscape. So even when wolves are at their highest levels, 600 to 700 wolves for the last 11 years, even when wolves are at their highest levels, severe winters still drop the deer population. And then when you have mild winters and wolves at their highest levels, the deer population still recover. We just don't have enough mild winters. We don't, in all the 20 years that I've been here, one time, and it was in the early part of the 20 years, have we had 3 mild winters in a row. We've never had it since, and it was ages and ages ago. I see what you're saying. You're saying if there were no wolves, there would be more fawns. That is not untrue. Yeah.
If the DNR manages the hunting license for the bear and the wolf is protected, why then doesn't the DNR issue more licenses for bear if they're such a predator on these fawns? Because in the previous presentation, those licenses are way down and the population of the bear is way up.
So there was a big, you can jump in here. No. There was a reduction in licenses, what, 2015 or 2012?
Yeah, 2012.
2012, there was a reduction in licenses at that point. Sometimes politics trumps what staff think is the right thing to do with the population. I'm just gonna say that. You can fill in that blank. This is relatively new The predator prey project finished, I don't know, a handful of years ago now. And so this is relatively new information for us. It doesn't mean that, the two populations, wolves and bears are, well, we can't really manage wolves right now, right? Because they're federally listed species. But bears have always been managed under this set of parameters over here. Doesn't mean that we would never introduce a new parameter into how we're thinking about bear harvest quotas, right? We haven't done it yet, but it doesn't mean that we won't start to do that sometimes. Start to consider that aspect.
Well, I hope it's done before they're extinct.
Before deer are extinct?
Yeah. I mean, it's.
I mean,
Really?
bears are not, the take home here is that. And maybe I should not have truncated this presentation, but. The take home here is that winter is having the hugest impact on deer populations, far more than predation. I also didn't put those slides up here that show that, just for that reason. But, it'd be nice if we could do something about winter. The only thing that we can do about winter impacts is have better winter habitat to help deer survive winter and have habitat that helps them put on lots of fat before winter, right? Jim?
I've heard you talk about food plots before, and the two things we do that, I guess we hope impact the weather are the food plots and maybe you could just speak, I think I've heard you say the closer to the yarding areas, is better location for them, but I wondered, we do the winter feeding, so is that extremely helpful, getting through a tough spring or?
Okay, I'm gonna handle those separately. The reason food plots being close to winter cover for deer spending less energy, the reason if you're gonna have your food plots to have them closer to that cover is because they have to spend less energy walking there, right? So that's where, and if they're undercover, they spend less energy standing there eating. They're not out in the wind and their body's cold, even though they're putting food in, it's not like a wash, right? So that's that one issue. Interfeeding of deer is a totally another issue, right? So, as wildlife biologists, we know that whenever it's risky stuff, whenever you feed wildlife, you subject them to potential disease issues. And you guys all know what those disease issues are, right? There's tuberculosis in Michigan and there's CWD in Michigan. Neither of those are things we want to have in the deer herd. Both of those things are, their spread is increased through feeding deer, right? It helpful. So it's supplemental feeding of deer can be helpful to deer. It can also be really hurtful depending on if people aren't doing it right. We hear a lot that people say, man, it's February, the end of February, winter's still going on. I have a sack of corn that's sitting in my shed. I'm just gonna put it out to the deer. They must be dying for it. And I'll just put it out. And then lo and behold, that person calls 4 days later and they have piles of dead deer because deer have evolved in this system that they live in. They've evolved. They don't just get to decide, I'm going to change my metabolism. Deer have evolved so that their metabolism reduces during winter months because they know they're going to go through this god awful starvation period, basically, right? And so along with that, the microflora, the bacteria in their gut evolve and change throughout the year also. So if they start eating something that they haven't eaten in ages, and now all of a sudden there's a giant pile of corn and they've had no corn since deer season, and it's end of February, early March, they're going to eat the heck right out of that corn. They will not be able to digest it and they will die with a stomach full of corn. So that's a situation in which supplemental feeding is not helpful, right? If folks wanted to be the most helpful they possibly could, that food would have maximum amount of protein. It would be spread out so deer are concentrated. would be consistent. You cannot just start supplementally feeding deer in the late winter months. If you haven't been doing it all along and have it benefit the deer, it will hurt. So if you want to supplementally feed deer, start early, continue your effort, have as much protein, spread it out, have it close to cover, have it out of the weather. Those kinds of things.
Great question.
Three, okay, I don't have a good memory.
How do wolves and coyotes interact?
They are not friends.
Do wolves eat coyotes?
Wolves will do anything they can to kill coyotes. It's not really I've seen them chasing them before too and catching them. It's not I'm gonna eat you, it's I'm going to kill you.
So wolves keep the coyote population down.
I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, if this is a wolf territory, any coyote going through there who's gonna bark or make noise along the way is putting himself at risk. That doesn't mean, I mean, you have coyotes and wolves on the club here. They coexist. But coyotes being the smaller of the two predators, they're gonna be quiet, right? You're not having, those guys aren't walking down the road together at the same time. So,
DNR is issuing 1,000 anti-list permits. Can you explain the reasoning behind that with the deer population down? We get on the fishing game committee, we get that question.
yep,
And we have to decide whether
I can
clubs running.
I will explain it, as politics. That's all I will say about that.
And we used to have a wolf season for a year or two.
1 year.
1 year. A federal judge out west stopped it. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho have wolf seasons. Not they have wolf season, but many places they have a shoot on site. What's the difference between their protection and protection here?
It starts with the fact that it's a different population of wolves. The federal government,
Different subspecies or?
no, the federal government has, please help me if I say anything wrong here, okay? The federal government, when the federal government tries to delist wolves in a certain area, delist means take them off the endangered species list. Before they can say, these wolves aren't endangered anymore. We want to take these wolves here in the Midwest, which is pretty much Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We want to take those off the endangered species list. The first thing they have to do is say what that population is. It's called a distinct population segment. So they say, okay, we're going to call these Midwest wolves the Midwest distinct population segment. So they're a separate population segment than the wolves you're talking about in out west, Idaho, Montana, blah, blah, blah. There are different population of wolves out there. Shoot, what else did she say? Why do they get to have a hunt and we don't? Why do they get to manage wolves and we don't?
Yeah, what's different? Why the difference?
Because the Midwest distinct population segment of wolves, every time the feds take them off, the feds get sued by folks that don't want them off the endangered species list. And as soon as they are sued, they have to go back on the list until that court case is settled. Those things take a really long time. The one wolf season that we had, 12 or 13, wolves were off the endangered species list for a long enough period of time. And our Michigan's wolf management plan, which is highly regarded across the country, which says that the first wolf plan said, we will manage wolf problems. We're going to manage places where we have problems with wolves killing livestock or dogs. We've given farmers permits and they don't take care of the problem. We're going to find those areas where we have these chronic problems. And those will be places where in a wolf hunt, we'll try to reduce the target risk in those areas. So we had that one hunt, we had those areas defined where met those exact criteria. Right, and a lot of people complain that we did not allow trapping. That was because anti-trapping groups that were really trying to go into they were trying to decide what state are we going to go to next and get rid of trapping. That Michigan was on their short list. We didn't want to lose all trapping in the state of Michigan, so we did not have trapping in that hunt at the time. That's a very short explanation of why our population of wolves in the Midwest is different from their population.
And two, for the northern Rocky Mountains distinct population segment, which is like Idaho, and wolves there were actually congressionally delisted. So federal legislators were actually able to attach basically wolf delisting to a federal budget bill, something unrelated to wolves. And so they basically attached a rider to it that said wolves in these states or in this area are no longer federally protected. And in doing that, that budget bill got approved, went into law, and that was something that could not be sued or challenged by animal advocacy groups, which are typically what has happened in the past. So I think I just heard about another attempt for the Great Lakes distinct population segment or wolves here, where they're trying to do that. For our wolves, they've tried it several times in the past. A lot of times it'll get attached as a rider. Then somewhere along the way in the legislative process, somebody yanks it out. And so being able to have, I think those Western states, it's a lot easier to have bipartisan support for some of that legislation that can get there. And it's just something that hasn't happened here. And that's where you look at the rest of the lower 48, wolves that have been on the endangered species list have not come off through the normal delisting process with the Endangered Species Act anywhere. That's the one exception, and it was through congressional removal, basically.
Did you have three or did we get all three?
No. Well, except for that, you didn't really give a reason for the go permits.
I'm just gonna tell you politics.
Yeah.
I need a paycheck. Politics.
I did, I know that you take wolf every so often. I did see a pack of 6 wolves one time, bow hunting. They were all the same size. Is that the same family? It stays in the same den and, you know, the dens in the north part of the club? Family of wolves?
It's just one pack on the club, yep. I know in the past where they have been, I don't know where they den right now. If this animal stays on the club and stays alive long enough, we'll probably know where the den is in spring. We color after wolves are pretty much done hanging out in the den, so I don't know where that den is right now.
You said you trapped wolves earlier this year on the club. How many did you trap and how many did you tag?
I caught one and I collared one.
Was that your goal or do you want more?
Well, we typically are trying for 1 collar per pack. Sometimes that changes based on situations. We caught one here the year before, and it didn't stay in the club, so I was hoping to catch a second one. Unfortunately, when I caught that first one, 4 other wolves saw that guy get caught and didn't
Has this one stayed on the club?
Yep. Yep, they didn't want anything else to do with it. We're making life hard.
So you 1 pack of wolves.
1 pack of wolves on the club, yep. And these wolves.
How many are in the pack?
It depends. Every pack is a little different. I think, gosh. I think there were 6 that I saw tracks of on the club too, but I wasn't paying a lot of attention to how many, just more like, where are they? Can I get them to step on nicely? Well, that's it.
One of your slides, I think you showed that the mortality rate is like 25% for an adult wolf.
Yep.
75%
Yeah,
survival.
75% survival, yeah.
There's really not a predator for a wolf, right?
Not other than humans,
Oh, yeah, humans.
yeah,
But we're not allowed to shoot them,
well, yeah.
so we're really not a predator.
We're not a legal predator.
So what kills them?
They get hit by cars, they starve, they get injured trying to catch prey and that. They get break their skull, they're gonna suffer till they die.
I was just surprised that it was that
And,
severe.
and people, obviously, I mean, legal or not, people do shoot wolves.
I think it's like human mortality is like 64% tolerable. Somewhere around there, like over half.
Yeah.
But that includes vehicles, like you said, and illegal killing.
Yeah,
And then sometimes we can legally authorize people to.
right. I was thinking you meant what are like natural sources. of mortality.
What,
You're next.
No, he's, he's the husband. I missed the earlier part because I was in a class, but, are packs fluid? Because my understanding, there used to be several packs up here, I guess Jocko and Cranberry. I don't know.
Nope, that is
the
all one,
case or not?
that's all one pack for sure. And that's been that way, it's been all one pack on the club for the 20 years that I've been.
Not very
But here's the thing, you know, pack, like if there's a pack of 5 wolves, they don't all move together around like this, right? 2 might go this way, 1 goes that way. They do not spend all of their time together, so maybe people saw some tracks near Cranberry, and saw some at Jocko, and thought they were separate packs of wolves. And those guys cover lots of ground in a day, right? So certainly that amount of ground in a day is not for a wolf.
And I did know, David, did you mention the Wolverine we saw 6 years ago on Jocko? Long story short, we were.
What, we did definitely see a Wolverine.
was
Now
Wolverine
DNR said
spot
it was
once or
impossible.
twice.
Yeah, I didn't hear about it.
Well, I'm just letting you
Oh,
know,
okay.
it was like the most fabulous thing, because it's like, what the heck is that animal? It's so bizarre. Meantime, my friend and I would go to Mackinac Island, see a stuffed animal, and go, that looks kind of what it is, that's green. We saw it probably the same one again, I know they've got like a 500-mile range of radius, so we had gone to Cini, it was the year that they did the Hemingway honorarium at Cini, and talked to the DNR there, and I poo-pooed on, it's like, no, there's no, but no, that was Wolverine. So I don't know if you've gotten any new information about that, because that was.
It definitely was. I mean, we went on the internet and we looked at pictures of Wolverines and it definitely.
So we don't have any updated information on stuff like that, but just like cougars can travel all across the country, you know, it's not impossible that, I mean, there are wolverines in Canada, northern Canada, there's certainly is possible that a wolverine could get
Well, there must
down.
have been a lot of them in the States since everything's called Wolverine.
Yes, well, Missouri is called the moose capital too. So. Anybody else?
I had,
Yeah.
is this presentation available online that we could see it?
I don't know how you were gonna share it or not share it. It's not available online otherwise, but,
We're gonna work on
sounds like,
I mean, I took a few pictures of slides. They don't come out very good.
yeah.
All right.
One thing I will say, we live in Marysville, how about 30 miles north of Columbus, pretty high